an office. So, you know, creative office is sort of occupied like a church. It's less dense than a typical office, but there is no designation in the parking code for creative office. So we said, well, if you had to supply the parking required for office, which would kind of be the most intense use of the property, could we fit it on the site? And we've done an analysis that shows we could fully park this as an office use on site without overflow parking on the street. And some of that is, there's some tandem parking in here. The city allows a certain amount of parking to be replaced by bike parking. We would use 13% replacement. And the other element is that this lot doesn't have a building on it. It was acquired when they were thinking about redeveloping the whole site to have a complete site. So we looked at, well, could we add any square footage? This is the existing square footage. No change to these buildings or their size. And our analysis told us that we could add about 16,000 square feet of two-story building here, which we could park on site. So what we're proposing to do is to ask the city to give us what we call a QCM zone. The community might be familiar with that because the QCM zone was adopted for the west side of Los Angeles River in Frogtown. And there's an ordinance that was done for a lot of properties along the river that were very similar to this. They're old manufacturing facilities, and the city wanted to have some controls. They didn't want them to continue to be used for heavy manufacturing or to have more intensive development. So the city adopted a zoning overlay, QCM. What does that mean? It means the CM zone with a Q, and the Q means restrictions on the CM zones, things you could ordinarily do in a CM zone, but you cannot do. And so we're proposing to use that model, and actually our starting point is let's discuss just adopting that zoning for this property, because it's something that has gone through the community process. But let's see. I prepared a letter to the committees, which I sent in last week, but I don't know if everybody's seen it. But attached to this, and I can arrange to distribute it, or if we can help distribute this, is a copy of what this QCM zone is, and what it allows and what it doesn't allow. Basically, and this I do have, I brought copies of the CM zone, which is the city's general zone, and the Q, as adopted, limits this. So basically, what we're looking at is the possibility of a light manufacturing user, or we think the more likely use is a creative office type user. We don't have a tenant. We don't know who would be interested, but we want to be able to say, well, the zoning is in place for you if you like this property. And then if we have a tenant, what we would then do is prepare plans that are specific to their needs. So this was an artist concept of what it might look like. You know, I think you might have seen this. This is the brochure. This shows what a creative office space might look like inside. This isn't really our proposal. We don't know what a given tenant would want, what they want, because now we have to do something special with this property. If we change it, like if we have to gut the interior and fix it all up, because it's being used for set storage now, we've got to take those plans to the Cultural Heritage Commission. We have to have fully developed architecturals. We have to show them it's consistent with whatever the historical aspects are considered. So a fair amount of investment here, and it's done for the design, because they're going to approve a certain set of designs. So we're proposing basically a two-step thing. First, we're asking that the city give us this zoning, and we hope the community will support it. And we're here to introduce it to you and want to think about it, talk about it. We're at a starting point. And then, assuming that the city approves that zoning, we'll be able to market the property. And if and when we have any tenant interest, we will take the improvements to the site through the city's cultural heritage process. And at that time, we'll know, okay, what's the tenant? What are they proposing to do to the buildings? The buildings basically have to be retained, and the city has oversight as to what kind of changes can be made to them. And that's kind of a summary. This is the site plan that shows how we might park it, assuming the most intense use. We don't know we're going to get the most intense use that would be allowed. It could be a light manufacturer and has this, they do light manufacturing operations, don't have all that many employees. What this shows is, well, what if it were an office user? Could we park it on site? And then we're proposing, as we do this, when we go through the rezoning process, we'll do all the ordinary things that are required by the city process. We'll do an environmental study. And obviously, we're proposing to retain the buildings and enable their restoration. So we're not proposing major construction. There's a possibility of another building here on the corner, two-story building not to exceed 30 feet high, That's 16,000 square feet. But we don't know that we're going to have anybody interested in building a building here. Possibly, if someone wants the space, we could do it.
Do you want me to walk this around?
Sure, and then I'll.
Can someone else take the second one?
And then, since hopefully hopefully that's clear enough, but it probably is not. So ask any questions you might have. Yeah.
Would you be limiting the number of employees working there?
No, we're not proposing to put. What we're proposing to do is limit the uses. So the QCM limits the uses, but we're not proposing to limit the number of employees, because if we start to do that, it becomes hard to recruit tenants. You know, we would like to be treated as, once the zoning is in place, like any other property that has that zoning. You may have, we think we know our parking, for example. We're going to study in our environmental review the most intensive use that we can imagine, which would be straight ahead office. And since there's no creative office, we'd study as if it were a standardized office, which we think is the highest generator of traffic, the highest generator of parking, and that's what we'd study. But then we think the use will come in at that as a maximum, but most likely less, because that is not the kind of building you occupy for a general office use. It's more likely to be occupied by a less intensive use.
Are there any comments from either of the committees? Brad?
Given the highest density you're considering, how many parking spots do you think you might need? Are you going to include in that allocation for parking for this other lot? Or is that a totally separate entity? Are you trying to combine them? It sounds like you're trying to combine them, which makes sense to some extent.
Well, what we've done in our plan, for planning purposes, we really have three sites. There.
Shh. That's your picture show.
Quiet, please.
Yeah.
That's your picture show. Yes.
Maybe we need to pause while everybody looks at this for a second.
Yeah, let's take a moment to let people look at it. Yeah.
That was what I was leading to. So I'm glad they're doing it.
So what we've done there is, what you'll see is there are essentially three parts to the site. There's the showroom building, there's the factory building, and there's what I call 3990, which is the pure moving and storage lot. And so we don't know whether there'll be one tenant that wants everything, or one tenant may want the showroom building and not the factory building. Someone else might want the factory building. So in the study here, we've labeled these things, and so when you have a chance to look at this and have a copy of your own, we've labeled this site 1, 2, and 3, just for that purpose. And we've done an analysis to show how, if they were occupied independently, so someone just took, for example, the showroom building, could there be parking just for the showroom building?
On its lot.
On its lot. And could there be parking just for the factory building on its lot? Mm-hmm. And could there be parking just for the possible new building at 3990 on its lot? And that's what this shows. Okay. And they all can be fully parked for what is the most conceivable intense use. I don't want to use the word intense, but if we're talking about, well, what's the maximum use of the property, it's probably office.
The way this goes is we have to do the committee questions first and then go to the...
Any other comments from the committee?
I'd like to speak from the Equine Advisory Committee. We were primarily concerned about preserving that for equine activity, and it's my understanding that Verdant Street would be left as it is, unimproved and not used as access to that.
And that's another aspect of the plan we've designed, is we're proposing for all the vehicle access would basically take place at the current driveway on Chevy Chase. We wouldn't take access on Verdant. There is a driveway there, but we're showing that closed. We don't need to take access from there. We don't want horses mixing up with cars and cars making dust. So we don't really need to do that. We have to go through the city process and see if the city requires any kind of driveway on Verdant, but we're not proposing to change Verdant.
So it might be only emergency access.
Possibly only emergency access.
And the other things would be protected as they are now in terms of from the equine area where the K-zone abuts.
Yeah, we wouldn't change any of that. We have a dedication as part of our property that we would dedicate part of the property to the city for Verdant if the city wants to take it. But we're not proposing to pave it or to change it. I think, one of the things it's got a very good response to this proposal. Once we have a tenant, we imagine the tenant's gonna wanna improve the site. We've shown some basic improvements, we've shown some landscaping, we showed how the site might be parked and striped and whatnot, some on-site landscaping. It's possible the tenant may wanna have improved the frontage along the park. So open windows, open some entrances, it's just a wall there now. But we're leaving that all up to the possible future tenant, to see what they come up with.
Are there any other comments from the committee?
I'm wondering what consideration you have for the agricultural zoning and what you have investigated for that, because there have been plenty of discussion over the time on that property. In fact, well, I won't go into it, about aquaponics, aeroponics, all kinds of growing mechanisms. You can grow them up and down and all around and floating on the water.
Yeah, so aquaponics could be a use under light manufacturing, but we're not comfortable with the agricultural zone because that basically.
So that's my question,
right,
really.
We're not comfortable with the agricultural zone because it's so limited. It only allows agriculture. So that would mean we'd have to find an agricultural tenant. Very tough to do, and and really limits how this property can be occupied. So, in terms of the desire of meeting the community's desire to preserve the complex, I don't think anyone wants to see it as heavy industry or wallpaper manufacturing. The light manufacturing seems to be a good use, office/light manufacturing. Most likely what we think there's a good market for the office part of it, but we don't know yet. So we think if we get the flexibility, we'll get a good tenant in there. We'll obviously restore that complex, make it an asset again to the community. It'll introduce employment opportunities, and hopefully this is the proverbial win-win.
So then, if a tenant did want to do some sustainable farming there, it would be permissible under light manufacturing?
I think it's a permissible use under light manufacturing, yeah.
Because there is some kind of new thing that's come out that it has to be on, to do it in LA, you can get tax breaks and all that kind of stuff, it has to be on ag zoning.
It could be, and then, then the other issue is what tenant can afford the property, because the property needs major work.
Yeah.
This is one of the practical problems with, the city and the community supported this as a historic property. It's not in good shape. So somebody with some bucks has to come up and say, like, I want to invest in that property. I want to make it functional, and I want to redo the infrastructure, electrical, plumbing, structural, all the things that would need to be done to make it occupiable. So we need to have some flexibility to have a tenant that can use the property right. We don't, if an agricultural company came in with the strength to do that and they say, we want that location and we can do it, they might be the tenant. But we don't want to limit the spectrum of possible tenants unnecessarily.
Yeah, under QCM, would anyone be allowed to live there?
QCM, so the QCM zoning that was adopted for Frogtown, and the one we're throwing out there as a model, allows for live work. And there's a definition of in that zone how that has to be done, and we don't particularly think that building is very adaptable for living, because it's a big, massive floor plate. So all the interior units would, they'd be dark. You wouldn't have. We don't think it's adaptable, but conceivably it could be used that way. So we think it's much more likely we'd get a creative office user or something like that.
If there's no more, is there any more committee questions or comments? So we will now move it.
I want one follow-up question.
Oh, yes.
Back to the agriculture, which is why you're trying to, I think, go for this new designation, so you can basically eliminate the agricultural.
Right.
I'm wondering, which to some extent makes sense because there is no agricultural watering available in Los Angeles City. But I'd like to preserve if possible. It seems like a nice area to try to dovetail in with the horses and stuff. So I'd like to keep that if we could.
The agricultural zoning?
Yeah.
Well, we're not proposing to change that for the adjacent lots. So, agricultural zoning is a real rarity in the city of Los Angeles.
That's the reason
We're almost the only property this is actually a factory property, and I forgot your name, I'm sorry. Jan, you mentioned that the community advocated getting agricultural zoning for it. So, but an agricultural zone on an industrial building, well, it's, that you introduced a conflict, so, but there isn't any other agricultural zoning in the city of Los Angeles. You have to go all the way out to the West Valley to find a lot that's zoned for agriculture. So, but we're not proposing to change the zoning of the equestrian facilities next door. We're just going to leave that alone. We just want to get this facility right so we can put it back into action.
Okay, so now we can move to public comments. First row, Jan.
I have a question. The number of people coming in, if they can't park on the lot, they end up parking on the street, especially in front of my house. We've gone through this before.
Yeah.
To the point that the whole Chevy Chase is wall to wall with visitors, not necessarily people who work there, but visitors.
Yeah.
Have you made any plans for the visitors?
Yeah, no, our study and our plans show how we would meet this, what we did on there, again, is how we would meet the parking requirement for office. Even though the city doesn't require it because it's historic property, how we would do it to be responsible in the eyes of the community. So what you'll see there is we have sufficient parking spaces, and this assumes the addition of a 16,000 square foot building. I'll tell you our steps in the analysis is, as we looked at it, we said if we didn't add any square footage, we could have the whole site would self-park. Everybody could drive in and have, if we add square footage, which is the 16,000 square foot building, we have to have some amount of tandem parking. And we have, so we're putting that out there conceptually, but we could, what the city would do is if we occupied it in that way, if we built the additional square footage and it was occupied for office, which we don't really know it would be, then we would have parking attendants for the tandem parking spaces, and we could park it all on site, and we don't anticipate there'd be any spillover parking.
Would there be overnight, are the people working overnight, night parking there, or is it state parking?
You know, I haven't really thought about that. I mean, most facilities of this type don't work round the clock, but
We've had that problem before, 24
Yeah.
hours around the clock.
I actually have one question
Sure.
in regards to parking. If you rent all three locations, it's fully occupied, what's the maximum amount of parking spaces you have? For cars, not bicycles, but cars and trucks.
we have, where's
Is it 115?
Down here.
Sorry, I got my site plan. Can I have the board? I can read it easier.
Am I in your? Here, no, I'll get it. Got that?
Okay, so what we would have is, we would have 130 parking spaces.
130.
130.
That's if all three units are occupied.
That's if we built another building,
Copy.
and they were all occupied for this use. If obviously a less intense use, we may not have to have this many spaces,
Yes.
but we could put them all there.
And then that's not including bicycle and
No,
motorcycle.
bicycle parking would be additional.
Okay.
We'd have 140 bicycle parking spaces. The city's encouraging, bicycle parking. There's a mandatory requirement for bicycle parking. We'd have to have 24. The other thing the city allows you to do is you can offset some of your required automobile parking with bicycle parking. So in this analysis, we've offset 13%. So for an office use, which you'll see when you have a chance to look at this yourself, you'll see that for an office use, there'd be 159 total spaces required per code. If this code doesn't exactly apply, but we're treating it as if it does. All right, so when I say doesn't exactly apply, that means that when you're doing historic reuse, one of the concessions the city makes is it doesn't require you to add additional parking. But we've analyzed it as, so how much parking would we actually need? 159 spaces, we'd provide 130 total spaces, and then we'd provide the balance as bicycle parking replacement. So we don't think there'd be spillover parking, even if the most intense.
Are there any other questions in the front row? No? Jan, one more.
So if you have 6 people in an office, and how many offices do you anticipate having? Did you work that out for the parking of it?
No, so that's not the way it would work. So the city has standardized parking rates.
Okay.
And its standardized parking rate is office. They don't have creative office. So these illustrations, the illustrations that were in the brochure shows a typical